I don't even know how to start this because, honestly, I never thought I'd be that guy sharing a story on the internet. But here I am, typing this out at 3 a.m., heart racing, because the more I think about it, the more I feel like something's going to come crashing through my window any second now. Maybe writing this will help me process everything, or at least put it out there in case something happens to me. So, here goes. It all started last summer when I was at my lowest, like rock bottom lowest. I had just lost my job at this crappy tech support gig, not because of anything I did, but because the company decided to outsource everything overseas. My girlfriend at the time decided that was a great opportunity to take a break. Spoiler, she's dating someone else now. Bills were piling up, my landlord was on my ass, and I was living on ramen noodles and free Wi-Fi at Starbucks. Life was bleak. One night I was scrolling Reddit, bouncing between RY unemployment and R late-stage capitalism, basically wallowing in self-pity, when I stumbled across this post on R Deep Web Stories. It was this guy claiming you could find legit work on the dark web if you knew where to look. I didn't really believe it. Half the posts on there are made by edgy teenagers trying to sound mysterious, but the curiosity itch was real. I started Googling how to access the dark web, downloading Tor, getting a VPN, all that stuff. It was surprisingly easy, which in hindsight should have been my first red flag. Like, why is it so simple to find a place where people buy drugs and stolen credit cards? But I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about rent, and maybe getting some takeout for once, instead of living off Maruchan chicken flavor packets. After an hour of clicking around, I landed on this site called the Silencer Network. Sounds sketchy, right? The homepage was super minimal, just a black screen with some text that said, "We solve problems discreetly. Apply within." It had this box where you could type your email to get started. Now, here's where I should have noped out and gone back to watching conspiracy theory videos on YouTube. But I was desperate and stupid, mostly stupid. So I typed in this burner email I had from years ago when I was pirating movies and clicked enter. Almost instantly, I got a reply. Like, I didn't even have time to close the tab before my phone buzzed with a notification. The email just said, "Welcome. Your skills will determine your worth. Click here to begin your evaluation." There was this link, and before I could talk myself out of it, I clicked it. It took me to this weird questionnaire page, like something you'd see on one of those sketchy online personality tests. Except this one didn't ask about my favorite colors or Hogwarts house. It asked things like, have you ever been in a fight? Do you have experience handling weapons? How far would you go to protect someone you love? Do you believe in justice? The questions got progressively darker, like, have you ever fantasized about hurting someone who wronged you? What's the worst thing you've ever done? By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. And not just because I was broke and hungry. It felt wrong. But again, I was desperate. I hit submit and tried to convince myself it was all some elaborate troll. The next day I got another email. This time it was from someone calling themselves the Arbiter. The message was short and to the point. You've been approved. Your first assignment is ready. Click the link to accept. Okay, so at this point, I was freaking out a little. I mean, who gets a job offer overnight without an interview? But instead of being smart and deleting the email like a normal person, I clicked the link. Curiosity kills the cat, right? Except in this case, curiosity turns the cat into something much worse. The link took me to a profile page with my username. They'd auto-generated one for me, Penance 56, and there was a single job listing. The description was vague, but it got my attention. Target: individual identified as a high-value threat. Last known location, redacted. Objective, neutralize. And then at the bottom, in bold red letters, pay $50,000 upon completion. $50,000. I don't even know what came over me. I mean, I'd been applying to regular jobs for weeks and couldn't even land a barista gig. And here was some random stranger offering me more money than I'd ever seen in my life to do. Well, something illegal, obviously. But $50,000 could change my entire life, pay off my student loans, get my car fixed, move out of my crappy apartment. There was an accept button at the bottom of the page. My mouse hovered over it for what felt like an eternity. I remember staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop thinking, what the hell am I doing? And then I clicked it. I don't think I slept that night. Partly because I was anxious about what I'd just agreed to, but mostly because my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The arbiter had sent me a string of messages with details about my target. They didn't tell me much, just a name, we'll call him Mr. X, a grainy photo that looked like it was pulled from a security camera, and an address somewhere in the middle of nowhere, like middle of nowhere, Ohio. There was also a file attached, but it was encrypted. The email said the password would be sent once I arrived at the location. At this point, my brain was screaming at me to back out, to delete everything, toss my laptop in a river, and pretend none of this ever happened. But then I thought about that number, $50,000. I mean, maybe this Mr. X was just some drug dealer or mob boss, someone who deserved it, right? I convinced myself I was doing something good, like some vigilante stuff. Batman, but broke. I packed an overnight bag, gassed up my car with the last $20 in my account, and hit the road. When I got to the address, it was just after midnight. The place was exactly what you'd expect, an abandoned gas station off some desolate highway. The kind of spot where bad things happen in horror movies. I pulled into the lot, and my headlights lit up this crumbling building with graffiti all over the walls. The windows were shattered, and the "Open 24/7" sign was dangling by a single screw. I sat there for a while, engine running, debating whether I should just turn around. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text message from a blocked number. Go inside. Alone. I should have left. I know that now, but I didn't. Because I was broke and stupid. Mostly stupid. When I walked into that gas station, the first thing I noticed was the smell, like mildew and gasoline. The place was completely empty. No shelves, no cash register, just a counter in the corner with a single laptop sitting on it. The screen was on, glowing faintly in the dark. The moment I stepped closer, the screen changed. A message popped up. Welcome, Penance 56. The file password is redacted. Open it now. I plugged in the password, and the file decrypted. It was a video. Shaky, low-quality footage, like it was filmed on an old phone. My stomach churned as I hit play. The video showed a man sitting in a chair, tied up, his face bruised and bloody. He was crying, begging for his life. And standing over him was Mr. X, the guy from the grainy photo. Except this time, he wasn't the victim. He was the monster. The video ended abruptly and another message appeared on the screen. Do you believe in justice now? And that's when I heard the door behind me creak open. The second I heard that door creak, my entire body froze. You know that feeling when you're so scared you forget how to breathe, like your lungs just stop working? Yeah, that was me. I wanted to turn around. I needed to turn around, but my body was like, nope, not today. All I could do was stare at the laptop screen as another message popped up. You're not alone. Chills. Literal chills shot up my spine. Whoever, or whatever, was behind me wasn't even trying to be subtle. The sound of boots crunching on shattered glass echoed through the gas station, each step slow and deliberate, like they wanted me to hear them, like they enjoyed it. I finally worked up the courage to turn around, and what I saw? Let's just say it's burned into my brain forever. There was a man standing in the doorway, but he wasn't like anyone I'd ever seen before. He was tall, way too tall, like NBA player tall, but something about his proportions was wrong. His shoulders were too broad, his arms too long, like someone had stretched him out in Photoshop. He was wearing this old beat-up trench coat that hung down to his knees, and his face, his face, was completely hidden under one of those cheap, featureless white masks you'd see at a party store. The kind that somehow makes everything 1,000 times creepier. I took a step back, and that's when I noticed he was holding something. A crowbar. Not like a rusty tool from some garage, but a clean, polished one. Like he'd picked it out just for this. The man tilted his head, almost like he was sizing me up. And then he spoke. Or at least, I think he did. His voice didn't sound human. It was distorted, mechanical, like it was coming through a bad speaker. "You're late," he said. Late? For what? I didn't have time to ask because he started walking toward me, slow and steady, like he had all the time in the world. "Wait," I stammered, holding up my hands like that was going to do anything. Look, I'm just here for the job, okay? He stopped dead in his tracks, and for a second, I thought maybe he was going to let me go. But then he pointed the crowbar at me like some twisted version of a teacher scolding a student. "Finish what you started," he growled. And just like that, the lights in the gas station flickered and went out. I don't even remember how I managed to grab the laptop. 1 second I was standing there, shaking like a leaf, and the next I was sprinting out the door, clutching it like my life depended on it, which, let's be real, it probably did. The parking lot was pitch black, but I didn't care. I made a beeline for my car, fumbling with my keys like I was in one of those slasher movies where the victim always drops them at the worst possible moment. Except this wasn't a movie, this was real. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and for a split second, I thought I was safe. But then I looked up. He was standing in front of my car, perfectly still, his head tilted again like he was curious, like I was some kind of science experiment he couldn't wait to dissect. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the tires screeched as I lurched forward. I wasn't thinking about what would happen if I hit him. I just wanted to get out of there. But when the car reached where he was standing, he wasn't there, like he just vanished. 1 second he was in front of me, and the next, gone. I didn't stick around to figure out how. I floored it out of that parking lot, my heart pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel steady, but I didn't care. All I could think about was putting as much distance between me and that gas station as possible. I didn't stop driving until I hit a McDonald's about 20 miles away. It was one of those 24-hour ones, with the bright golden arches lighting up the empty parking lot like some kind of sanctuary. I parked in the farthest spot from the entrance, shut off the engine, and just sat there. The laptop was still on the passenger seat, the screen glowing faintly in the dark. I didn't want to touch it. Hell, I didn't even want to look at it. But I knew I couldn't just leave it there. Whatever was going on, this laptop was the key to it all. And if I didn't figure it out, I was pretty sure that guy, or whatever he was going to find me again. I grabbed the laptop and went inside. The place was almost completely empty except for a bored-looking cashier scrolling through TikTok behind the counter and an old guy nursing a cup of coffee in the corner. I ordered a large fry and a Coke, mostly so I wouldn't look suspicious, and found a seat in the back where I could keep an eye on the door. The moment I opened the laptop, another message popped up. "Running won't help you." I slammed it shut so fast I almost spilled my drink. My hands were sweating, my fries were getting cold, and my brain was doing backflips trying to figure out what the hell I'd gotten myself into. But I knew I couldn't just ignore it. So, after a deep breath and a quick prayer to whatever God might be listening, I opened it again. This time, there was a video waiting for me. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button. Part of me wanted to chuck the whole thing in the nearest dumpster and pretend none of this ever happened. But another part of me, the part that had clicked accept in the first place, needed to know. The video started with a familiar face, Mr. X. Only now, he wasn't the monster in the video, he was the victim. He was sitting in a chair, tied up, just like the guy in the first video. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. And standing behind him was someone new, a woman wearing the same featureless white mask as the guy from the gas station. The camera zoomed in on Mr. X as he started to speak, his voice trembling. I don't know who you are, he stammered, but please, you don't have to do this. I'll pay you, okay? Whatever they're paying you, I'll double it. The woman didn't say a word. She just raised a knife, this long, curved thing that looked like it belonged in a museum, and pressed it against his throat. The screen went black before I could see what happened next. And then another message appeared. Your target is not innocent. Justice requires sacrifice. That was the moment I realized what I'd signed up for. This wasn't a job. This wasn't about justice or righting wrongs or any of the crap I'd told myself to sleep at night. This was a game, a twisted, brutal game, and I was the next pawn. I didn't leave that McDonald's for hours. I just sat there in that sticky plastic booth, staring at the laptop like it was going to explode or something. The Coke I'd ordered was flat, untouched. The fries, cold and soggy. I wasn't hungry anyway. My stomach felt like it had turned into a black hole, sucking in every ounce of calm I had left. At some point, I noticed the cashier glancing at me from behind the counter. I must have looked insane, wide-eyed, hunched over my laptop, probably pale as a ghost. I decided I needed to move before someone called the cops or started filming me for TikTok. The last thing I needed was to go viral as the creepy guy in McDonald's. I grabbed the laptop and headed back to my car, keeping my head down. The parking lot was eerily quiet. You know how McDonald's parking lots are supposed to feel safe, like some kind of universal law? Yeah, not this one. The streetlights were flickering, and I swear I heard faint footsteps behind me as I unlocked my car. But when I whipped around, there was nothing there. Just shadows. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and opened the laptop again. I didn't want to, but I didn't have a choice. This thing was like a black hole, pulling me deeper and deeper no matter how much I wanted to escape. Another message was waiting for me. You have 24 hours to complete the assignment. Failure will result in consequences. Consequences. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. What kind of consequences? Were they going to send that trenchcoat guy after me? Or worse, the masked woman? I couldn't stop thinking about the knife she'd been holding in the video, how calm and methodical she'd been, like this was just another day at the office for her. And then, as if the laptop could read my thoughts, another message appeared. You are not the first. You will not be the last. Underneath it, a list of names started scrolling. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. Each name had a status next to it. Completed, in progress, or failed. My throat tightened as I realized what that last one meant. Failed didn't mean they didn't finish the job. It meant they were finished. I scrolled through the list, hoping, praying, to see someone, anyone, who'd managed to get out of this alive. But every name under failed had been crossed out in red, and every name under completed felt like a death sentence for someone else. And then I saw it. my username. Penance 56, in progress. I slammed the laptop shut and screamed into the empty car. What the hell had I gotten myself into? This wasn't just some dark web gig to make a quick buck. This was a trap, a meat grinder disguised as a job offer. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. I don't even remember how I got there. All I know is that by the time I stumbled inside, I felt like I was being watched. Every shadow, every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made my heart skip a beat. I locked the door, drew the blinds, and barricaded myself in my room like that was going to help. But the messages didn't stop. The moment I opened the laptop, another one popped up. Your target is in your city. Address provided below. My city? My hand started shaking as I clicked the link. It took me to a map, zoomed in on a neighborhood I recognized. A little too well. The target's address was barely 10 minutes from my apartment. Before I could process what that meant, another video loaded. This one wasn't grainy or shaky like the others. It was crisp, high def, like it had been filmed with some expensive surveillance equipment. It showed a man walking out of a Starbucks, carrying one of those reusable cups with the logo on it. He looked normal, ordinary, like someone you'd see in line at Target or standing in front of you at the DMV. But then the camera zoomed in and I saw his face, and I recognized him. It was Mr. Coleman, my old high school English teacher. No way, this had to be some kind of sick joke. Mr. Coleman wasn't some evil mastermind. He was the guy who used to give us extra credit for reading poetry out loud in class. The guy who always wore those ugly sweater vests with little snowflakes on them during winter. The guy who wrote, "Don't be afraid to tell your story," on the whiteboard every Friday before dismissing us for the weekend. But there he was, clear as day, sipping his overpriced coffee and looking over his shoulder like he knew someone was watching him. And then I remembered something. Something that made my stomach churn. A few years ago, after I'd graduated, there'd been rumors about Mr. Coleman. Nothing official, just whispers that he'd been asked to leave the school after some incident with a student. Nobody knew the details, and the administration had swept it under the rug so fast it barely left a trace. But now, sitting there with the laptop in front of me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if the rumors were true? What if Mr. Coleman wasn't as harmless as he seemed? What if he was just really good at hiding who he really was? The next message snapped me out of it. Your target is guilty. Proceed immediately. Guilty. That word stuck in my head like a splinter. Who were these people to decide that? Who gave them the right to play judge, jury, and executioner? And who was I to trust them? For all I knew, they were lying, twisting the truth to manipulate me into doing their dirty work. But then I thought about the video, the woman with the mask, the knife, the names on that list. If I didn't go through with this, I'd be next. There was no way out, not unless I did what they wanted. I sat in my car outside Mr. Coleman's house for what felt like hours. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. The porch light was on and I could see him through the window, sitting on his couch and reading a book. He looked so normal, so human. I checked the glove compartment, where I'd stashed the weapon they'd left for me. It was a gun, small and unassuming, like something you'd see in a cheap crime show. I didn't even know if I could use it. I'd never fired a gun in my life, and the idea of pulling the trigger, of actually killing someone, made my stomach twist into knots. But then I thought about the gas station, the trench coat guy, the knife, the list. This wasn't just about me anymore. If I didn't do this, they'd find someone else, someone innocent. And if I tried to run, they'd come for me. I took a deep breath, grabbed the gun, and stepped out of the car. As I walked toward the house, the shadows seemed to stretch and ripple like they were alive. The porch creaked under my weight, and for a second I thought about turning around. about throwing the gun into the bushes and driving as far away as I could. But then I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, and there she was, the masked woman, standing across the street perfectly still, her head tilted like she was watching me. I froze, and then slowly she raised her hand and pointed at the door. There was no turning back now. My hand hovered over the doorbell for what felt like an eternity. The gun was tucked into the waistband of my jeans, cold and heavy against my skin. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to ditch the whole thing and disappear. But I couldn't. Not with the masked woman watching me from across the street, her stillness more terrifying than any threat she could have made. It wasn't just her presence, it was the message. If I didn't go through with this, I wouldn't make it out alive. My name would end up in red on that list, crossed out like the others. I was a pawn in their game, and pawns don't get to make choices. Finally, I pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed through the house, cheerful and hollow, and almost immediately I heard footsteps inside. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might actually give out before the door even opened. When it did, there he was, Mr. Coleman, wearing the same kind of ugly sweater I remembered from high school, this one with snowmen stitched across it. He looked happy to see me. Confused, but happy. "Can I help you?" he asked, tilting his head like he was trying to place me. I froze. I hadn't planned this far ahead. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, Mr. Coleman. I'm here to kill you because some psychos on the dark web told me you're guilty of something they won't even explain." "Yeah, right." Yeah, I stammered, my voice cracking. "Sorry to bother you, but my car broke down a few blocks over. I was wondering if I could use your phone to call a tow truck." It was a terrible lie, but he didn't seem to notice. He smiled, actually smiled, and opened the door wider. "Of course," he said. "Come on in. It's freezing out there." The inside of his house was exactly what you'd expect from a retired English teacher. Shelves packed with books, the smell of old wood and coffee, a fireplace crackling in the corner. There were framed photos on the walls, most of them showing him with students, or standing in front of blackboards covered in quotes from Shakespeare and Hemingway. "Phone's in the kitchen," he said, gesturing toward the back of the house. "Do you need a drink? Coffee? Tea?" I shook my head, muttering a quick, "No thanks." I just wanted to get this over with. The longer I stayed, the harder it was going to be to go through with it. He seemed so normal, harmless. I couldn't shake the image of him from the video, though, sitting there tied to that chair, the fear in his eyes. Except now, I was the one holding the gun, and he had no idea. I walked toward the kitchen, but something caught my eye on the way. There was a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar, and beyond it a set of stairs leading down into what I assumed was the basement. I don't know what made me stop. Maybe it was the faint sound I heard coming from down there, like a muffled groan or cry. Or maybe it was just the feeling, this gut-deep sense that something was wrong. "Bathroom's on the left if you need it," Mr. Coleman called from the living room. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and instead of going to the kitchen, I stepped toward the basement door. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, and the air grew colder with each step. It smelled damp down there, like mildew and something else. Something metallic. I tried to convince myself it was just an old basement, that the smell was rust or maybe a leaky pipe. But deep down, I knew better. When I reached the bottom, I froze. The room was dark, but not completely. There was a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering weakly. It cast just enough light to reveal what was in the middle of the room. A chair. The same kind of chair from the videos. And sitting in it was a man, tied up, His head slumped forward like he was unconscious. My stomach turned as I stepped closer. The man was alive. I could hear him breathing, shallow and ragged. His clothes were dirty, torn, and his face was bruised so badly it was almost unrecognizable. But I knew who he was. It was one of the names from the list. I don't even remember pulling out the gun. 1 second I was staring at the man in the chair, and the next I had it in my hand, trembling as I pointed it at him. My mind was racing. What was he doing here? Was this some kind of trap? Was Mr. Coleman in on it, or was he just another victim? And then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, aiming the gun, and there he was, Mr. Coleman. Only now the friendly smile was gone. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and he was holding something behind his back. "You shouldn't be down here," he said, his voice shaking. "What is this?" I demanded, gesturing toward the man in the chair. "Who is he? Why is he here?" Mr. Coleman didn't answer. He just took a step closer, and that's when I saw what he was holding. A knife, the same long, curved knife from the video. "Put it down," I said, my voice cracking. "Put it down, or I swear to God—" "You don't understand," he interrupted, his tone desperate. "I didn't want to do this. They made me. They're watching." My blood turned to ice. "They made you?" I echoed. "Who? The people from the dark web?" He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't have a choice. If I don't do what they say, they'll kill you," I finished for him. My grip on the gun tightened. "Yeah, I know the feeling." For a moment, we just stared at each other, both of us breathing heavily, both of us trapped in the same twisted nightmare. And then, from somewhere above us, I heard a faint creak. The masked woman. "They're here," Mr. Coleman whispered, his voice barely audible. "We don't have much time." "What do you mean, we?" I snapped. "You're the one with a guy tied up in your basement." "I didn't want to do it," he shouted, his voice cracking. "They told me he was a killer, that he deserved it. I thought I was doing the right thing, but then they sent me another name. And another. It never ends." I didn't know what to say. My mind was spinning, trying to piece it all together. The videos, the list, the woman with the mask. This wasn't about justice. This was about control, about breaking people until they'd do anything to survive. The next sound we heard was the front door opening. Slow, deliberate. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. "They're coming," Mr. Coleman said, his voice trembling. "You need to go." "I'm not leaving you," I said, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "If we run, maybe—" "There's no running," he interrupted, his eyes darting toward the stairs. "They'll find us no matter where we go." And then, before I could stop him, he raised the knife to his own throat. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. The last thing he said before the knife made contact was, "Tell them I'm sorry." As his body hit the floor, the light bulb flickered and went out, plunging the basement into darkness. And then I heard the creak of footsteps on the stairs. The basement was pitch black. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the faint creak of footsteps descending the stairs. Slow, deliberate, like whoever or whatever was coming down wanted me to feel every second of it. I crouched down, fumbling for the gun I'd dropped when I lunged at Mr. Coleman. My fingers brushed against the cold steel, and I gripped it tightly, willing my hands to stop shaking. The darkness felt alive, like it was pressing in on me, suffocating me. The footsteps stopped. I froze, straining to hear anything at all. But the silence was worse. It was so heavy, so complete, that it felt like the world had just paused. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it. The faintest whisper, so soft I wasn't even sure it was real. "Penance." I whipped around, gun raised, but there was nothing there, just shadows. And then the bulb flickered back to life. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs, the masked woman. Her head was tilted, just like before, like she was studying me. But now, up close, I could see that her mask wasn't as featureless as I'd thought. There were faint marks on it, scratches, almost like tally marks etched into the surface. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The gun in my hand felt useless, like a toy. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She didn't even seem to care that I was armed. It was like she knew something I didn't, like she was in control of this game and I was just a piece on the board. And then she spoke. Her voice was soft, calm, but distorted, like it was coming from a speaker buried deep in her throat. "You passed," she said. "What?" The word escaped my mouth before I could stop it. She took a step closer, and I instinctively backed up, my shoulder bumping into the wall behind me. The man in the chair was still unconscious, or maybe dead, I didn't know. Mr. Coleman's body lay in a pool of blood at my feet. The smell of iron was overwhelming, making it hard to think. "You passed?" she repeated, as if that explained everything. "Passed what?" I snapped, my voice cracking. "What the hell is this? What do you want from me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, rectangular device. A phone, but not like any I'd ever seen before. She held it out to me, tilting her head as if daring me to take it. I didn't move. "Take it," she said, her tone sharp now, "or you'll end up like him." She nodded toward Mr. Coleman's body and my stomach turned. I wanted to refuse, to throw the gun at her and run, but I knew it wouldn't matter. There was no running from this, not anymore. With trembling hands, I reached out and took the device. The screen lit up as soon as it touched my palm, and a familiar name appeared on it. Penance 56, completed. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's yours now," she said, taking another step closer. I could feel her presence like a weight pressing down on me. "You've been promoted." "Promoted?" I repeated, my brain struggling to keep up. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You proved yourself," she said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You followed the rules, you didn't run, you made the sacrifice." I looked down at the phone again. Another message popped up. "New assignment ready. Do you accept?" My stomach dropped. No, I'm not doing this. I didn't sign up for this." She tilted her head the other way, almost like she was amused. "You did. The moment you clicked accept, you signed up for all of it. There's no backing out now." "I didn't know," I started, but she cut me off. "You knew enough," she said, her voice cold. "And now it's your turn to play." I stared at the screen, the weight of what she was saying sinking in. This wasn't just a job. This wasn't something I could walk away from. It was a cycle, a never-ending game designed to chew people up and spit them out. Mr. Coleman had been where I was now, and before him, someone else. I was just the latest pawn. "No," I said finally, shaking my head. "I'm not doing it. I don't care what happens to me. I'm done." The masked woman let out a low, almost mechanical laugh. "You think you have a choice?" she said. "There's only one way this ends." She pointed at the man in the chair, who was now starting to stir, groaning softly. "Your target is waiting," she said. "Do what needs to be done, or you'll join the list." I looked at the gun in my hand, then back at her. My heart was racing, my mind screaming at me to find a way out, but there was no way out. She was right. There was only one way this ended. And then I made my decision. The gunshot echoed through the basement, deafening in the confined space. The man in the chair slumped forward, silent and still. Blood pooled beneath him, mixing with the stain already on the floor from Mr. Coleman. The masked woman didn't react. She just stood there, watching, her head tilted as if she were observing an experiment. Finally, she spoke. "Good," she said. "You'll do well." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the gun. I felt hollow, like a part of me had been ripped out and thrown into the void. She turned and started walking back up the stairs. Halfway up, she paused and looked over her shoulder. "Welcome to the network," she said. "We'll be in touch." And then she was gone. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the phone in my hand. The screen had gone dark, but I knew what would happen if I turned it back on. Another assignment. Another name. Another life ruined. I wanted to throw it away, to smash it, to burn it. But I knew it wouldn't matter. They'd find me no matter what I did. They always find you. By the time I finally left the house, the sun was starting to rise. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, like nothing had happened. I got into my car and drove, not knowing where I was going, not caring. The phone buzzed in my lap. I didn't look at it. I didn't have to. I already knew what it would say. "New assignment ready. Do you accept?" They say justice is blind, but now I know the truth. It's not blind. It's a game, a cruel, twisted game. And I'm just another piece on the board. But maybe, just maybe, I can find a way to break it. Maybe, or maybe I'm just fooling myself.